wondering how our audience are feeling, both physically and mentally, right now at this moment in time. So there's a few votes coming in. Oh, it's hovering around kind of good and pretty okay. A couple of people have said that they're struggling. Just to let you know that this is an anonymous poll. All of our polls are anonymous, so we can't see who has voted for what this morning. So please feel free to be as honest as you can be with us as we go through today. Let me just share that with you this morning so that you can see what people have said. So, vast majority of us are feeling good or pretty okay. And there's a few of us that have felt better and a few of us that are struggling. I did a webinar yesterday and we came across one of the most important phrases at the minute, which was, it's okay to not be okay. And I think that's kind of one of our key messages this morning when we talk to our panelists. So let's move on. The reason why we're doing this, we looked at a study. There's an interim study that's come out from the Home Worker Wellbeing Survey, which was put out just to look at how people are coping with COVID-19 and this new way of working. And this interim results just at the moment has only spoken to 500 people, but I think it's a good kind of snapshot of how people are feeling at the moment. If you look at mental health and well-being, 40% of people said that they're not calm or relaxed, and 33% said that they frequently felt isolated, which is not a great place to be. So we're going to look with Dr. Liz Royle this morning about how we can perhaps make ourselves feel a little bit better and a little bit more resilient in these difficult times. But not only in terms of mental health well-being, but physical health. 64% of people reported loss of sleep due to worry, which you can see is actually kind of a combination of both that mental well-being and physical well-being. And that's why we wanted to put this webinar together this morning, because we don't think that sort of mental health and physical health are separate. I think that 1 and 2 definitely kind of blur together. But headaches and migraines, over half the people that have kind of suffered that during this time. And general aches and pains. In fact, I could have put a whole list of aches and pains on there. There were all sorts of things: shoulders, backs, hips, legs, and then actually when you look at this, 60% of people are saying that they're worrying that they're taking less exercise. So maybe the two are linked. Then there was a whole load of other stuff, which I thought would be interesting to share, but I couldn't quite decide which area it fitted in. This 48% of people who are working long and irregular hours, does that fit in mental health and well-being, or does that fit in physical health, or does it actually impact on both of those? And that work pressure that people are feeling and the lack of kind of balance in their life, I think that's also something that's affecting us quite strongly at the moment. So that's why I'm so glad this morning to have our wonderful experts. So I'm going to let them say hello to you properly and introduce themselves. Let's start with Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi everybody. So just a very brief overview of me. I've worked in the field of crisis and trauma for over 22 years, working from the range of immediately after an incident, preparing for incidents, and treating people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I have to say, I've never done a pandemic, but a lot of the responses are very much crisis mental health and even trauma as well. So looking forward to talking to you all this morning and hearing your questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Liz. Really good to see you. And then Adi, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Hello there, folks. Good morning to everybody. As Nicole said earlier on, I'm part of the Worthwhile Training team. Been involved in the whole range of management and well-being awareness from the mid-80s onwards. And I think one of the key things to get across today is finding something that works for you personally. We will be talking about what levels of activity, what types of things we could do. And I'm fortunate enough to work with people from your next door neighbour right the way through to Olympic athletes and World Cup rugby players. So I think the key thing is motivating people to find out what works for me and how does this help me personally and my well-being. So if we take that open approach, I'm looking forward to some of the questions.
Fantastic, thank you. So really grateful to both of our panellists to come in and chatting to us this morning. Also grateful to our sponsors this morning. We've organised this as Worthwhile Training, but the BSIA, the British Security Industry Association, who are one of the really big supporters of Lone Worker Safety Live, have also sponsored this webinar this morning. So big shout out and thanks to them this morning. So look, I'm going to hand over to Liz. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can hand this over to Liz so that she can share her slides with you and have a bit of a chat. We're going to take questions as we go through, and then at the end of Liz's session, we'll post some of those questions to her, or we'll answer them live. We'll see how we go. Liz.
Okay, so this is where you now see my very slick technical skills from beginning. There we go. Is that working for everybody?
Yeah.
Good. Oh, that's a relief. I can relax now. So we're often asked, you know, why are some people really struggling with this, and why are some people just seeming to breeze through? And I think one of the big things for me is that everybody is having their own personal experience. And in the media, there seems to be quite often this sort of general view of what life is like during the pandemic. And that actually isolates a lot of people who are not having the same experience. So I just wanted to sort of set the context really of how this actually is so different for people. If we think about your accommodation, first of all, you know, there's a massive difference between somebody who's living in cramped accommodation, possibly having antisocial neighbours. You know, even when you're at home, you notice the neighbour's dog barking all day when you're trying to work. Whereas somebody else may have a very spacious house, lots of room to move about in, lots of quiet space, a garden. So we've got this huge disparity. But we've got a disparity as well between people who are working extremely hard, our key workers, and people who are working from home, who are working very hard, and others who have got nothing to do. You've maybe been furloughed. And although it sounds as though that's quite a nice place, you know, sitting in the garden, catching up on your jobs, your DIY, after a bit, that becomes extremely stressful as well. And so there's this comparison going on. Some people have a financial buffer, some are facing literally financial ruin. So our society is becoming quite fractured in a way. The difference between, you know, how we are at home, you know, whether we have people in the house, whether we're all living on top of each other, whether there's conflict, children being at home, even domestic violence. So a lot of people use work to actually compartmentalize and leave this behind. And we also, we sort of, we have a sense of order. We know what's what, and suddenly everything's turned on its head. So the outer world has changed drastically. But actually, there's our inner world. There were people who had existing pressures before COVID-19, and they don't go away, they just become amplified. So everybody's having a really unique experience. One of the things that supports us when we're going through change are our relationships. Now, we've not only been sort of detached from a lot of our social support. You know, we might not be able to see people, we may be living alone, we may not have the same relationship with work colleagues or family or friends. But going back to the first slide, if you think about the glue that cements our relationships together is quite often that commonality. You know, I'll give a personal example. So I have a member of my family who his business is really reliant on face-to-face, and we used to talk together about business, marketing, that kind of thing, and we've suddenly got this fracture that it's quite difficult now to talk about those things. So all of these relationships that used to be supportive have got this undercurrent going through them. We've also got our own personalities. And you might think, well, extroverts, they tend to need social interactions in order to keep them healthy. They need more of that. So they may be really struggling with the isolation. And you might think that introverts, well, they've got it easy. They're on their own. And speaking as one, I've suddenly got all these people in my space at home. So, you know, everything, we're all reacting to this in our own different ways. In terms of how we feel we can control the future and how we view change, we're all very different. And I know right at the beginning, there was a sense, before it really hit everybody, that there was almost in some places, with some people that I would talk to, almost this little excitement about, oh, things are going to change. You know, life's not great at the moment, but things might change, and who knows, mixing it up. So all of these personality factors, all of the external factors, how we believe, we're all then looking at what's happening through that filter. And this is our different levels of actual and perceived threat. So what we are talking about is we're talking about the human response to threat. So, find my slides. How do we do that?
Interesting, Liz, just for a second, the first question we had came in actually was kind
Okay.
of, I'm interested to find out why some people are coping and why some people aren't.
All right.
We started to kind of answer that question. So I think it's really interesting for our audience.
It's a lot of this is the kind of theory that we use when we're talking to people who've been through traumatic events. We're always looking at, you know, what is actually going on, what's your interpretation, what are your circumstances, and there's hugely complex factors involved. So we can never say, oh, we're all going through the same thing, because we're not. But having said that, we all have the same common human survival response. And that's going to be triggered in different ways depending on how big we perceive this threat to be. So when we are faced with a threat, it doesn't matter if it's a tiger, a health concern, a massive change, an uncertainty, our brains respond in the same way. So our brain is wanting to learn about the threat. It's wanting to find out as much information about it so that it knows how to deal with it. And what's happening now is we're looking for answers in places that we, you know, maybe are not helpful. So social media, we're looking for all the rumours, or we're just asking questions that can't be answered. You know, when is this going to end? What's life going to be like? So that it doesn't matter that we can't answer it. Our brain's impulse is to ask the question, what can I learn about it? How can I make sense of this and protect myself, not just now, but in the future? So we go through all the what ifs. What if that happens? What do I do? So these are all a really natural part of our brain's response. And as it's working on this, it's sort of preoccupied with these questions and trying to make sense. It suppresses the clever thinking part, which you think, you know, we actually need that right now. But because we go into survival thinking, we go into a primitive thinking, primitive brain, and we lose our concentration, we lose our focus, we lose our short-term memory, our problem solving. I don't know if people are noticing that kind of things, that they're feeling like the brain's just a bit fuzzy. There may be one thing I'm doing, I'm losing my words, and I'm using the wrong word, I'm calling everybody by the wrong name, and that is just a sign that actually my clever thinking is not very engaged at the moment. And if you know that, that takes a little bit of the sting out of it. It's when we don't know it and we don't understand it. So we've also got a physical reaction to threat. So if you think, you know, this is meant to deal with a tiger, we've got the tiger in front of us, our stress hormones are going to peak, and they're going to make changes in our body that will allow us to deal with the threat, so run away or fight. So we're getting these big surges of hormones, stress hormones, that make changes in our body. And as they fall away, we have this exhaustion. And again, I'm hearing a lot from people about, why am I so tired? You know, I'm absolutely exhausted. And it's the falling down, the coming down from that peak performance. So if you're faced with a tiger, you want your body to be, if you're going to run, you want to be Usain Bolt. And if you're going to fight, you want to be, who's a good boxer?
Come on, AD.
AJ.
Okay, right. So that's who you want to be. You want to be somebody. I don't do boxing, so but you want to be like them, don't you? And this is what your body's going to try and do. So the fast and shallow breathing that's associated with the physical response is meant to get oxygen to our muscles. But when that goes on in a chronic time like this, a chronic crisis, what it tends to lead to is it leads to breathlessness. We might even notice we've stopped breathing, it's shallow breathing, we get dizzy, we get palpitations, we just don't, we feel lightheaded. And that's combined with the fact that our heart is going to be going a lot faster and our blood pressure is going to be going a lot higher to push the blood round to our major muscle groups. So again, palpitations, and these can feel quite frightening symptoms, but they're very much related to our body's response. if you're faced with a tiger and you want to run, you want to fight, you want your big muscle groups to be working, your back, your neck, your arms, your chest, your legs, so that you can do that. And so we hold this tension in our muscles without actually realizing it. And we might notice trembling or tingling, or, you know, the aches and pains that were in that survey. You know, that's part of our body being ready to act. And even things like, you know, our shoulders hunching up like this is a primitive response to protect your neck. You know, that's your vulnerable point. It's like our body armor coming up. So we have this really quite, it can be subtle and it can be not so subtle changes. But if you're faced with a tiger, the other things that you're not going to want to do is you're not going to want to sleep. So our sleep is going to be disturbed, because it makes no sense when we're under threat. Who would want to rest and sleep and take your attention off the threat? So things like sleep will be disturbed. We might have vivid dreams as our brain's trying to make sense of what's happening, or we might be waking up early in the morning, not getting to sleep. So that can then feed into the fatigue and the exhaustion as all these stress hormones are going round and round our system. A lot of people will notice their appetites are disrupted. One of the things during the sort of the peak response is our liver it releases fatty acids and sugar to feed the muscles for this fast fight and flight. But this is going chronically. So, you know, how many people are reaching for the biscuits and the comfort food, the sugar, the sugary fatty food. And this is our body's way of stockpiling. So it's not just people going out to the supermarkets who are stockpiling. Your body is actually stockpiling, ready for the threat and ready for the next threat. So there's a real, you know, it's really important to understand that. And our body and brain are basically getting ready to do something, deal with the threat. So fight, get angry. Now, we can't fight this virus, we can't fight the changes, but we can get angry. We can get angry with the world, we can get angry with the government, we can get angry with the people around us, we can get angry with ourselves. And that might be snappiness, irritation, just not being tolerant, or it might be full-on rage, but it's being driven by this fight and flight response. So flight, run away, get away from this. That's the anxiety. So feeling anxious, you know, I don't know what to do. I feel restless. I feel agitated. I just want to do something. And that, you know, that sense of, you know, not being able to settle. But we also have this urge to take control. Now, I'll hold my hand up. This is one thing that right at the very beginning, I couldn't take control of the big stuff, but I could certainly take control of how that dishwasher was stacked. And, you know, those little things, when we can't control the big things, the little things become really important. So we can become really, and this feeds in with the snappiness, with the, you know, the whole tiredness, but we can start to think, actually, that's important, when really it's not. But if we can be kind to ourselves and say, actually, this is just my brain wanting to control something. I'm not a bad person, and accept it, and then that helps us to sort of be easier. Now, your final response when you're faced with a tiger, if you can't run and you can't fight it, is to give up, to freeze. And that is an extreme response to an extreme threat. So in a situation where it's not a tiger, but it's still a threat, we still have this lower level. And this is the give up, I can't do anything, the helplessness, the apathy, the what's the point? And that is our body's response to not being able to control. So a lot of people are feeling these things and noticing these things, and then just beating up themselves and saying, I shouldn't be feeling this, I shouldn't be doing that. So it's so important to actually accept and understand our emotions as a natural response to something that is completely not natural, not normal. But our bodies will respond in this way. So it helps quite often to think of this in terms of, you know, things will change. And when you're stuck in the middle of it and you're feeling all these things, you can feel like it's never going to change. So one of the things that helps sometimes is to understand the stages of how we adapt during a crisis. So you may recognise where you are in this, and there may be a little bit of going back and forth with it. But the first thing that we do is we pretend it's not happening. Okay, we don't like the new what's happening, so let's pretend it's not happening. So, you know, let's ignore it. Let's say it's all, you know, it's fake news, it's a conspiracy theory, it's not real. Let's ignore it and let's try and carry on as normal. So we don't want to change, we resist it, and we feel quite fearful and quite angry. And when we feel fearful, we're really fearing for our basic needs. So this is why we saw such a lot of stockpiling at the beginning. People were fearful of not having their basic needs met. So they're not really thinking in a rational, unemotional way. You know, and I'm not trying to justify people's behaviours, but this kind of resistance to change, I'll rebel, I won't stick to the rules, I'll do all of this. This is this denial. We're very selfish, so very selfishly orientated in that phase because we're looking out for us. And as we move into the second stage, we sort of say, okay, well, I do need to change. I need to do something differently. I can't focus on the things that I can't do. So instead of saying, well, I can't go to the gym, can't go to the pub, can't go to the football, we start looking at, okay, what could I do? What could I replace these things with? But in this stage, in stage 2, it's impossible almost to move into that until we've actually accepted where we are and accepted our reaction and accepted our feelings. So we have to be able to do that in order to move into that phase. And this phase, we can be in that for a very long time. But what we'll notice is that we're starting to have good days, bad days, and the good days will start to get more and the bad days will start to get less. And we start to move into the third stage, which is where we're adapting. And this is where we start to feel as though, you know, we have a renewed sense of our own control because we can control ourselves rather than the situation. We start to feel stronger and calmer, and we're starting to have a sense of, you know, everything will be okay. And that can take a long time to get there. And what we find is that if people are in different phases, there's this friction between, if somebody's in stage 1 and they're talking to somebody in stage 2, it's almost like they can't talk the same language. So people will move through this in their own pace, and it just sometimes helps to be able to understand that that's where they are, that's where I am, and this is where we're hopefully headed.
So Liz, some people are saying, just to kind of give you the heads up on where we're going with this, a few people on our chat are saying that it's really understanding, it's really useful to understand the why we feel like this.
Yeah.
And can you give us some advice on kind of what we can do to just, where we're in one of these stages, wherever we are, what can we do to help ourselves feel better right now?
Okay, yep. That's exactly where I'm headed, which is really good. Okay, so just on a last point on this, as we move through, things will continue to change, but we will get much better actually at adapting. We'll build our tolerance. So what can we do about it? The first step is always understanding and accepting where we are. Until we do that, we're not going to be motivated to take the action, because it will just feel like a sticking plaster. It'll just feel like, oh, you're just trying to make me feel better, and actually I feel really bad. So what can we do? We have to work with the body and the brain. So that's why it's so important to understand this. So if we think about the brain response, the brain is actively looking for threat. That's its job in a crisis. And we can let it run away with itself, and we can go on a downward spiral into looking at more and more and more. And there is plenty out there. You know, if you turn the television on, everything is about COVID-19. If you pick the paper up, everything. If you look on social media, it's pretty much everything. And every time we feed that, every time we do that, we're feeding the response, and we're feeding our brain's fear. So the first thing we have to do is say, actually, let's stop feeding it. So minimize your exposure. Think about, where are you getting your news from? Are you going to get it from, you know, maybe you watch the early evening news, preferably not the late night news before you go to bed. early evening or lunchtime news, or but really start pulling it back. And if you're finding with social media that you're getting pulled into it, you'll get that sense of you're doing something and you're starting to feel worse and worse and worse. Stop. Give yourself permission to stop and start looking at a much narrower focus, rather than thinking what's going to happen in the future, which is what your brain wants to do. Focus on, what can I do today? Okay, what can I do today to build my well-being, physically and mentally, so that whatever happens tomorrow, I'm in a better place to deal with it. So we're sort of bringing our thoughts back, and it takes practice. But the more you do it, the easier you get. So if you have somebody that you're calling or you're FaceTiming, and that they're maybe further back, so they're talking about, the rumours, have you seen this, have you seen that, and they're very highly emotional, limit it. It's better for you and it's better for them, because if they're going over it and over it and over it, what you're doing is you're allowing them to feed it. So change the subject if you can. A routine is really important. Any kind of crisis and trauma takes away our sense of order, takes away structure. And what we have to do then is we have to reinstate a new structure, a new routine. So even if that is something simple, like, when I get up in the morning, I'll get dressed, I'll have my breakfast, and then I'll maybe do some mindfulness, which I'll talk about in a minute, or I will do a set job. I'll have a lunch break at a set time. I'll do my social contacts at a set time. It's easy just to let the day just drift, or I'll do my exercise at a set time. But the routine really, really calms your brain. It takes time. None of this of switches. You can't just switch it on and off. But what you're doing is you're slowing it and slowing it and slowing it. Calming your thoughts. So there's loads and loads of information about meditation, about mindfulness, and about just calming your thoughts. You're not meant to sit there with no thoughts in your head. Your brain is meant to think, but you can distract it. You can think about something that is pleasant to think about, even if it's made up. You can think about slowing your thoughts, not stopping them. So just slowing, getting a little bit of more of a gap. So definitely that is one of the biggest things that people can do to calm the brains, is to, there's loads of resources online for that. And try and balance the negative news with the positive news. So looking for stories of hope. Again, I'm always oversharing. my son is in New Zealand, and it was lovely to see that, that they're lifting their sort of, they've not come out of lockdown, but they're lifting the restrictions, because it gives you that sense of hope that things are going back to normal. So looking for the positive news to balance everything else. They're really important for calming your brain. And then calming your physical response. So this is, very much a primitive system. And to make it sort of very simple, we've got two kinds of nervous system. We've got your parasympathetic, which is about rest and relaxing. That's all the times that you feel good. And you've got your sympathetic, which is your fight and flight. So if we're going to switch off the fight and flight, we can actually shut it down, because you can't be in two at the same time. We can switch on the parasympathetic. And the simplest way to do that is by calming your breathing. And if you can just sit for a few minutes and calm your breathing, just focus. Quite often I'll say to people, imagine that you've got sort of a balloon in your abdomen, and every breath in, your abdomen pushes out, it inflates, and when you breathe out, it deflates. Just taking 5 minutes to do that low breathing, that slower breathing, switches on the calm nervous system, and it helps to switch off this fight and flight response. If you do that regularly throughout the day, build it into your routine, and what I'll do is I'll put some, you mentioned resources, I'll root out a breathing exercise that we can put on, that people can practice that.
That'd be really helpful. Thanks, Liz.
And that chips away at the sympathetic nervous system. While you're doing that, you don't want to further stimulate it. So, you know, if you think you've got a child, the last thing you want to do is, who's agitated, the last thing you want to do is give it blue Smarties. So you know, but effectively that's what we're doing with the caffeine, with the alcohol, with the sugar, is we're basically giving ourselves blue Smarties. So if we can sort of cut them down a bit, you know, I'm not saying cut it out completely, but start reducing it slowly, that will reduce the levels of stress, arousal in your body. And I mean, like I say, I've worked with people with crisis and trauma for a long, long time. And one of the biggest things, the two things that I always get them started on at the beginning, one's the breathing and the mindfulness, and the second is get these stress hormones burned off. So you've got a body full of adrenaline, you've got an urge to act, you've got an urge to do something. Channel that energy into activity. It gives you a sense of purpose, it gives you that structure that's really helpful. And it burns off that production of stress hormone, and it sort of kids your body a little bit into thinking that it's got some control and that it's fighting that tiger. So that, yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. And the fact that people are saying we're not doing as much as we used to, it's so important that somehow we can pick that up. So I've ranted. You've got me on my hobby horse.
That's all right. It's fine. It's fine. There's been lots of questions coming in, actually. Some of these I'm going to hold on till the end, because I think it's kind of really good that we can share these when we've talked to AD as well. One of the questions about how can I re-engage that clever thinking that you talked about, and actually I think what you've done there is just shared some ideas about how you can do that with kind of the, you know, the breathing activities and trying to get rid of those stress hormones. So I think that one's probably already been answered. Yeah, I'm going to leave the questions, actually, I think, Liz. I'm going to go on to AD, because you've talked actually really clearly and you know, thinking about kind of where AD's going with his session. I think it's probably better to go straight to him, and then we'll go to the questions at the end, if that's okay. So I'm going to share my slides this end, which are actually AD's slides, just to confuse everybody.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'm going to let you have a chat.
Thank you very much. Liz, that was wonderful. It was a real interesting mix, because this fear factor and lack of control is huge. It's really huge. And the first slide we're showing here, some of you might be familiar with this idea of a performance curve. Often we relate this to a physical activity, but if you think about any activity, being a contributing household member, being somebody who has a work-related ethic, being somebody who might be making an important phone call, it could be just the same when you're looking at peak performance. So if we're feeling switched off, if we're in one of those states that Liz referred to of almost giving in, a minor freeze state, then we're going to underachieve, underperform. And the danger is this builds up into a I can't be bothered attitude, into a I can't cope attitude. Equally, on the other side, when we're looking at the red zone, everything could become a trauma. We could be very anxious about having to do things. Something I can share with you is the less I interact with people, the less work-orientated things I'm doing, the more each work challenge becomes a bigger challenge. So you can get over-anxious about things. So somewhere there's this perfect area in the middle, when I'm using that tongue-in-cheek, of performing optimally, somewhere where you feel you're maybe not on your A game, but you're certainly better than your C game. And part of today is about what can I do to feel more of my time in that peak performance zone. So if we think about working from home, classically a lot of it is based around sitting. Unfortunately, yeah, that's grand. It's a sitting environment. Very few of our working from home activities are physically active. So we might spend extended times, as we are now, sitting, chatting on the web, you know. So what can we do about it? Well, a lot of this is about posture. And I know the previous sessions you've done, Nicole, has it talked about the ergonomics of how you set up your workstation. Am I sitting comfortably? Is my screen height okay? All that has been covered on previous information. But I think one of the things is, are we moving regularly? I mean, I've sat here for a while and I'm already getting an itchy bum syndrome because I'm one of these people that has to move.
You're
I was a nightmare in meetings because, yeah. And naturally, when we're sitting, the blood tends to pull with gravity into our legs, into our backside. Just by sitting now, I can feel the chair touching into my hamstrings. So circulation's reduced. And we are naturally built to be active on a regular basis. And I read something recently, which I checked up with a specialist in diabetes, and she actually said, yes, what you've read is right. That even after approximately an hour of inactivity, your body's ability to manage sugars is compromised. We become less sensitive to insulin. So on that very fundamental level, can we try, say, every half-hour move? You know, have we got maybe have a cup of coffee? Have we got maybe go away and have a time out, go have my lunch, or just literally go up somewhere else? So I've moved from my desk situation. And that could also link into when you were talking earlier on, both of you, about stress areas. I think most of us would say lower back and upper neck and shoulders. Yeah. So just whilst I'm talking now, gently lift your shoulders up and roll them back. Just do it a few slow, steady times, because a lot of the tension around our upper body comes from the back muscles in the upper area. So can we just do some mobility movements? Even just moving to the side gently could be another option of keeping that spine mobile. But physically getting up and moving is so important. It really is. And some of you might have learned to actually perhaps have some of your phone calls. If they're not too formal, maybe I'm walking around the house whilst I'm having a call. Could well be that I've got a standing section when I'm actually delivering some of my stuff on computer. I can actually stand up and do that, maybe where that's possible. And one of the things that me and Nicole have often talked about is having that little glass of water on the side of your desk. Because if you're drinking, you're keeping hydrated. But let's face it, 20 minutes later, you're going to have a short walk anyway. So that helps. Yeah, I mean, going back to the work environment, I used to work in my own local council for quite some time. And I was a nightmare in the office. So we'd create office games. So I used to play basketball from a waste paper bin. So whilst I'm talking to you now, I might be throwing a piece of paper into a bin, collecting it, going back and keeping doing it. Now, if you're one of these people that collects your steps per day, you could clock up a few hundred steps just collecting that, and it keeps your mind breaking. Well, so little activities between stages can be really helpful.
Somebody's just put in a comment from Karen. She's saying do the 20-20, and I love this idea. It's that, you know, every 20 minutes get up and move for 20 seconds. And
brilliant.
We know also that our brains really only concentrate for that 20-minute period. So, you know, if we're running a training workshop, we change activities after that period of time. And I think it's a challenge when people are sat at a desk for a whole day that we don't change that activity. So totally. I think it's a really good suggestion. 20 seconds, just every 20 minutes.
Yeah. It's a really good, I mean, that helps with eye strain. It also helps with your thinking process, because we can get stuck into something. So by walking away from it and coming back, I don't know about you, but times I've changed an email or changed the way I've written something because I've seen it from a different point of view. I've allowed the artist in my brain to have a little bit of a chat when that's a word with the mathematician, and we come back and get it better. So, yeah, I mean, this goes into another poll that we've been talking about, is about how many times do you currently exercise per week? So if any of you'd like to have a look at that poll, maybe, Nicole, you can set that in motion.
I can do that poll for you. So here we go. Level of activity. How many times do you currently exercise per week? And if we're going to kind of clarify what we mean by exercise, and funnily enough, that was one of the questions, what's the difference between activity and exercise? I've put a definition here of, you know, you're short of breath, kind of, you know, you would be puffing and puffing a bit, holding a conversation for about 20 minutes or more. Would that be a good definition between the difference, AD?
I think when you're talking aerobically, definitely. Obviously, some people do like muscle toning exercises, which are putting the body under pressure that you probably wouldn't normally do in an everyday movement. So the combination of those, I think most people would be happy with that.
Okay, so let's see what people have said. Yeah, we've got a pretty fit bunch online.
Yeah, nice one. Nice one. That's awesome to see, isn't it? It really is.
Really good, yeah.
Going on current surveys, I mean, Sport England released information today saying they were concerned about how many young people, under about 40% were saying they're just not getting enough activity because of their shutdowns. So there's a whole lot of pressure. So if we move forwards in terms of the home workout slide, something we can do, if you mention what Liz said earlier on, we said about sometimes it's about doing what we can, and taking control could be, I have a way of making my own body feel belonging back to me. If I can do little bits throughout my day, that's my ability to say, this is how I'm coping. And rather than saying I'm going to do a full hour's workout, most people I talk to these days are doing bite-sized chunks. So if I'm perhaps working, I've had a little webinar, I'm going to go away, I'll have a 10-minute session, and I could do like abs and bums or whatever. I might do something else. Later on, I might have part of my outdoor activity walk. And later on, I might do some stretching. So little bits keep the body moving more regularly, but also give you breaks mentally and physically. And I think it means that there's less of a barrier. My experience through my years of in the fitness industry is people who are motivated find time, people that aren't find excuses. And I know that sounds really harsh in the circumstance we're in, but it's about self-efficacy. And one of the things we've got to be aware of is when I'm feeling restricted, my wellness and the way I look at myself is impacted. So that can be a big factor. And if we are looking at balance, if I'm doing something for my heart and lungs, if perhaps I'm doing a little bit of a home video, or maybe I'm actually doing my outside walk or cycle ride, am I doing something for my muscles? Am I doing some resistance-based activity? Am I doing something for my stretching and my mobility and my joints? And all these things, think about a balanced program. And I think one of the biggest things is setting realistic challenges. I think the biggest thing is, what do we want from this? And I think all of us, if we said, I just want to feel better, then it doesn't have to be too hard, you know? I think you can get just as much fun by putting the radio on and having a dance to some of your favourite music as you can by doing a structured interval-based training session that has a hard, intense sort of function to it. So be clear on what you're trying to achieve, make it so you know you can fit in part of your routine, and hopefully make it fun. I mean, I remember when I worked with my council, we did like a little table tennis challenge where we literally had an open table that you might sit and eat your breakfast from, put a book in the middle, and that was your net, and we'd play table tennis, you know? So you can start involving the family, you can make it user-friendly, etc.
Brilliant. Just talking about challenging goals, John, one of our participants today, said he set himself a target of walking 100 miles this month whilst on lockdown. He's on target with only 6 more to do today to complete the 100.
Wicked.
Yeah, that's cool.
See, they're the sort of things that make life real quite funky. And I mean, I'm very aware there's the 5K challenge, from couch to 5K, there's press-up challenges. They're all quite heavily involved. I would say to somebody, okay, maybe if I started off and maybe did some ab work or some squats or whatever, if I start off with doing 8, can I then see by the end of the week, can I do 10? You know, if I find myself walking for 10 minutes, can I make it 15? So realistic little jumps are so important, because when you achieve something, the whole body gets that. It really does. I mean, that adrenaline buildup that Liz was talking about during tension, adrenaline lasts in the system for about an hour and a half, using it positively. But think about the impact on the brain, thinking, I have just done this. So make sure your challenges are achievable within what it might be. But yeah, totally love that. Totally love it.
I think it also...
again, within a home working environment, we've done things whereby you might say, okay, I might, if you've got a place where there's stairs, I might walk up the stairs. At the top, I might do a little exercise. I come back down the stairs, I do another little exercise, and create like a little circuit almost in your house. Be creative. Some of the stuff on TV and the internet is some brilliant stuff, but there's also some not so good stuff professionally. So just be aware that what you do, you feel safe and it works. I mean, I'm sure there's a few of us out there who've done computer games with the kids maybe. You know, why not? If you're actually up and moving, you're doing something. It's such an important part of it.
We've got a comment from somebody called Jackie. She says she started 2.6 minutes of yoga on Saturday. Every day she's adding another 2.6 minutes. In 28 days, she'll be doing 67 minutes every morning. And I think that's just a lovely thing to do. So it just goes to show it can be yoga for somebody, it might be running for somebody else.
Totally.
And I think, like you said, it links into what Liz was saying earlier on about taking control. Yeah. And if we're taking control of something and being able to do that and achieve, that's going to be good for our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being.
Yeah. You're also switching your thoughts into a different area as well. So you're thinking about what you're doing rather than thinking about what's on the news. So it's, you know, it's just wonderful to do. Yeah.
And I think that's crucial, Liz, because it's me time. I think one of the things we've got to be very careful of is actually thinking we juggle this as well as everything else.
Yeah.
So I think we'll talk about that in just a moment. But there's another poll that we talked about, Nicole, wasn't there? Perhaps you want to introduce this.
Yeah, I will do. So this is quite an interesting one. And we've had a few people saying, I wonder how many more people are taking activity now when they didn't take exercise previously.
Yeah.
And also a really interesting comment that says, look, we need to be careful that when this lockdown doesn't finish, when this lockdown does finish, hopefully at some point. Sorry.
Freudian slip there.
Yeah, it was a little bit, wasn't it? That we don't just suddenly stop this good activity and exercises, the patterns that we've built up. For a lot of people, I see people out there now when I'm walking the dog that you look and think, yeah, you're new to running or new to jogging or walking. I hope you keep it up after this is happening.
Totally.
So let's have a look and see what people say. There's still a few more votes coming in. Sorry, people are still voting.
And of course, this is just a snapshot because, as you said there, people might not look at that and think, oh, well, I do yoga or I do Pilates. Well, hopefully the Home Keep Fit sort of covers some of those things.
Yeah.
And we're using very general terms here, but that make it realistic.
Still people still voting. Gotta hold on.
That's fine. But I think with the challenges, I mean, I can talk again personally. My sister is a very active person through her job in education, and her partner is a self-employed business manager. He's becoming more active because he's got more time to do it. She's becoming less active because her daily routines have changed.
So there you go. Look,
that's again, yeah. Now, I think that's a really interesting point because I think a lot of people are taking their activities outdoors. It's much harder to be activated indoors because motivation's huge. I mean, when we're talking about introvert, extrovert, Liz, in your session, some people find that exercising on their own, they just can't get the buzz for it. And the word exercise creates a negativity. I think a lot of people have negative views from school days, maybe. And just a brief idea that if you're looking at the difference between activity and exercise, it's almost like the intention. Exercise, in a lot of people's ways of thinking, is something you do deliberately to improve your health or improve your fitness. Whereas activity is something you do to achieve an aim, and in doing so, it keeps you moving. And I just want to sort of bring a point out here, because this idea of actually, if we are out and moving and walking, there was a really interesting study. I was lucky enough to go to Loughborough University, and whilst I was there was a study done by A.D. Hardman, and this is back in the late 80s. Now, basically, she took a group of people who had got similar backgrounds and split them into two groups. Now, one group every week walked 5 kilometres 3 times a week. The other group ran 5 kilometres every week, 3 times a week. So they did the same distance, but one at a running pace, run at a walking pace. And then when they did the comparisons, clearly the group who were running became fitter. If you measure the fitness levels of their lung capacity, their ability to process oxygen, that was all improved more than the walking group. But they looked at some health benefits, and on both groups, and I'm underlining this, both groups, their resting blood pressures were improved similarly. Their ability to mobilize fats in a less sticky form was improved. So their blood fat profiles were similar. And then their ability to tolerate sugar level changes, their insulin sensitivity improved. So they were much more less likely to experience diabetes-based issues. So I think it's a key issue. If we're active, walking itself, so many of your panel, your viewers have actually said this, by walking, you're doing so much for your health benefits, joint mobility, etc. So that's a really key thing. And make sure you give yourself that time to free your head, free your space, leave your phone calls, leave your emails till you get back or whenever. So it is me, it's taking control of me. And if I give me some time, I'm a better me. No two ways about it. And
I think that's the difference. One of the things you were saying earlier, sorry to interrupt, Adi, but you were saying about, these walk and talk meetings that you and I do quite often, actually. We'll kind of talk about work. I'll do it while I'm walking, and I know you're walking, and it's good for both of us. But then there's also that time where I will walk, or in fact, for me, actually, the thing that I've taken up more now than anything else is gardening. And that's a time where I won't take a phone call and I won't look at my emails and things. And I think, somebody here has suggested, gardening, housework even. I'm not sure I'd enjoy that much, but the gardening.
Put your music on, it becomes better.
Yeah, but but being outside and just getting that fresh air, and even just on days like today, you can stick a jacket on, stick your hood up, you can still go for a walk. It still does you good in that respect, doesn't it? So
Totally,
it's good
totally.
Yeah, brilliant.
And again, it goes back down to attitude. It's making these things, as opposed to becoming a chore, it's something I look forward to. Control it. Sometimes doing a little bit is important. Some people are lucky enough to be able to go out for a whole hour. Some people it might be 20 minutes. Well, even doing an exercise session. I mean, my partner's presenting a lot of videos online at the moment, and in a 45-minute aerobic session, she's got one of these watches that manages your step count. She's doing like 5,000-6,000 steps in 45 minutes with a gentle aerobic class.
Yeah.
So add that to your extra few minutes outside or whatever, you can get you 10,000, So there's little bits you can do. It really is important to do such.
I think the challenge with this, AD, is that you and I and Liz joining in could kind of have this conversation for the whole afternoon, but then we're breaking our own rules about getting up and moving, aren't we? So we can't do that. But I just wanted to go through to some of the questions, and thank you for that, AD. A lot of people are coming in saying they're really useful ideas and adding their own suggestions to them as well. But I want to go back to some of the questions that were brought up earlier on, if that's okay with you guys. Talking about kind of our own mental health and well-being, Liz, but people are also worried about people that they're living with, so family members. How can I help and support somebody who's openly admitted that they're struggling with depression? And we've got somebody else saying that they've got a partner who's worried because they've been furloughed, they don't know when they're going back to work, if there's going to be a job to go back to. How can we help other people within our family groups?
Firstly, set an example of what good self-care looks like. And secondly, encourage them to join you in it. So encourage them, accept that everybody's having their own opinion. You can't fix this for people. But what you can do is you can gently encourage them to do the activity, to take time out, to switch off from the thoughts about it. And always, if you are really seriously considered, get some professional help. If you're concerned, then, always do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got a question from Royle. Davies, one of our participants. He says, what are your views on maintaining contact with work colleagues and talking shop? Is that healthy, or do you think it generates frustration? What's your feelings about that one?
I think it depends. It depends on the relationship that you have with your work colleagues. What were they like before? What are they like now? And it depends on the subject as well. So are you talking about positive things that you can control, or is it becoming sort of collusive and just somewhere where you go on that negative downward spiral? So I would always say, how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel good? Do it. Does it make you not feel so good? Probably just avoid it or minimize it. That's my, in a nutshell, answer. I don't know if that helps.
I was doing a webinar yesterday, and with the group that we were talking with, we decided that really personal calls and personal check-ins and work check-ins need to kind of be differentiated, so there are those boundaries. People are getting a little bit zoomed out, now. And every conversation starts with a "how are you doing?" and you think, actually, just ring me up, ask me what it is that you need to ask me about work. Let me get on with what I'm doing.
Definitely.
And then let's have a separate time to catch up. And I think that's probably more healthy. Really,
do them separately and have a little bit of a focus as to how you're doing it, because basically if we ask somebody how they're doing, we don't usually get an honest answer.
So fine.
Absolutely.
We banned okay and fine from our answers as well. So if somebody says how you doing, you're not allowed to answer okay, not allowed to answer fine. Give me kind of a bit more of a sense check on that one. Good, thank you. AD, there was a question here actually, which is quite interesting. Again, something that's close to our heart because of the disability awareness training we do. It says, what would you recommend for those people with disabilities in terms of mobility? So people who are unable to go for walks, etc. What kind of activities would you suggest? And I know that's a $100 question
because obviously it's specific to the individual, and I think most people who may have a restriction in some form of their physicality know what they can and what they can't do already. So if I had limited use of my lower body, then I might do more activity with my upper body. So I might be doing the aerobic type activities that involve upper arm movements, because there is a certain heart and lung fitness value from that. Any joints that do move, take them through the range of movement that's comfortable. If I have limited neck movement, well, a slight forward movement and a slight sideways movement is something better than nothing.
Yeah.
So talk to that person, share with them, what's your normal range of movement? What are your abilities that you are comfortable doing? And let's do more of them. So if I was somebody who took time to move from one place to another, so be it. Allow myself extra time to do that. If certain things cause me discomfort, learn to where you might put something as a challenge, but if it becomes painful, that's a negative.
Yeah.
And always, again, like we said with Liz's point, medical advice might be important to just check up. So be careful you don't try and over-challenge yourself. People are very good at giving advice, but you've got to think, yeah, but you're not me. But equally, look at what you can do and do more of it more regularly. And I know that's vague, but unless we go into individual specificities,
And we are massively running out and over on time at the moment. We've got a few more questions come in, but I'm going to suggest that what we do is we'll answer these people individually afterwards, if that's okay, if you guys are happy to do that, purely because of time. And I think when we've set a time, again, we talk about boundaries, we've said an hour, we need to kind of finish kind of roughly now. So just to kind of say thank you to everybody and let you know about our next webinar that is coming up. You should be able to see that on my screen now. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fabulous. So our next webinar on the 14th of May is with Professor Tim Marsh and Tony Roscoe, both from Anchor and Marsh. And we're going to be talking about creative, effective and resilient remote teams. So taking this idea of kind of mental health and wellbeing to the next stage, we've talked today about kind of physical health and mental health for individuals, but how does that affect the effectiveness of your teams and the resilience of your teams as a whole? So we're going to be looking at that with Tim Marsh and Tony Roscoe on the webinar on the 14th of May. But I've got a last poll for everybody today, just to kind of get us to think about this. The question is, when was the last time you got up from your chair? If it's not since you started working this morning, that's worrying. If it was just before the webinar, which most people are coming in. I love the fact that some people did have a stretch during the webinar. And if you didn't do any of those things, then I'm hoping that you're going to get up and move and do those now. But massive thank you to everybody that's joined us this morning. We've been absolutely thrilled. There's been over 100 people constantly online. So that's been great. And a lot of comments coming in saying how useful this has been to them. Maybe we'll run another one similar to this a bit later on, or as I say, something similar, but we'll have a look at that. But just here you go. Look, let's just share these results. A few people did have a stretch during the webinar, so that was good. I was tempted, I must admit. Excellent. So look, just a thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Liz, for your time this morning. You're
very welcome.
Amazing. And thank you, Adi, again for your time and expertise.
Welcome, Liz.
And thank you to our audience for being involved. Hopefully you've got something useful out of that. It'd be really great to get any feedback from you after the event today. But thank you very much, everybody, and have a fabulous rest of the day. Get up and stretch.
Yeah.